All right. Welcome to another episode of the Meat Mafia podcast. I'm joined with my co-host here, Salazzo, as usual. Salazzo, what is going on?
Not too much, man. I am pumped. We got a very special guest and a close friend too.
Yeah, this is going to be one of those episodes that I think people will be able to get a ton of value out of. We have our good friend, Colin Carr on. Colin, what is going on?
Not much. Just got down with some clients, cleaning the office a little bit. Stoked to talk to you guys. Yeah, life is good. Stoked to be here.
Yeah, that's the way to be. Like just flowing through life, getting some good work done in the morning, and then a podcast with two meat guys in the afternoon. You can't beat that. So I wanted to give you a quick intro, but there's honestly so many things to hit on. One of which is, you're this, for people listening, you practice holistic health, which I think encompasses a lot. And one of the things that you, I think, have talked to Salazzo and I about a bunch is this certification that you've gotten with Paul Chek, who's really well known as this incredible holistic health practitioner who really understands the human body in ways that aren't conventional. So I'm actually curious, just to kick this off, like, what has your experience been like in kind of going through that process? And like, what would you identify your health school of thought as?
Right. Yeah. Well, Paul Chek is like the OG holistic guru, I would say. He's just this 60-year-old man who has 2 wives and is jacked in the hills.
Yeah, he's huge. If anyone's listening, you got to just like Google him right now if you don't know who he is.
Yeah. I mean, I joke about those things, but he is just a magnificent being. He's interesting. The education is top notch. It's definitely world class. It's beautiful because it really combines both a holistic approach to diet and lifestyle, and combines that with exercise kinesiology and orthopedic assessments and corrective exercise. So I'm in my 3rd year of now what they call the academy, and every year is just built upon the year prior, learning more advanced techniques for coaching clients through nutrition, through movement, through sleep, through the psycho-emotional components of health, and then learning more about the body too, and how to orthopedically correct somebody and get them healthy on those areas too, and how those cross over, right? And how those cross over and can affect your digestion, your emotional health, your sleep. Because I mean, the body is so interconnected, right? So the institute is phenomenal. I'm so happy I did it. I teach in that coursework. And you asked about the philosophy. We good?
Yeah.
Hey, cut
up a little bit there, Colin.
Fine.
All right, we're in the garage gym. So
do you want us to hit the pause and we can, if we can, solve anything on the Wi-Fi front, let us know.
I think I'm good now, but
okay.
Sounds good.
All right.
Yeah. No, all I was going to say, Colin, was that both of us know that you have a very high level wrestling background. And I was just curious, what was your journey to the holistic health side of things? How did you get started, and what kind of made you decide that this is something that you want to do as a full-on profession and career?
All right. Yeah, I love telling this story. Because both of you know I do Jiu-Jitsu. I mean, this guy over here, I've competed before together. So wrestling is just probably the hardest sport out there. It's one of the oldest sports. And if you want to talk about not being healthy, like that's probably the sport to do it. I mean, we lose 8 to 10 pounds a week to make weight, or constantly working out hard, pushing ourselves, just killing our adrenals. It's a very hard sport. It's a very disciplined sport. There's a shadow and light aspect to wrestling. It teaches you discipline, it teaches you hard work. It just teaches you how to get through the hardest moments of life. But coming out of that and having just torn my body to the ground, through injuries, through cutting weight, through exercising, I had all these problems, right? I had all these problems in my body. For one, I had this knee injury that wouldn't go away, and I had seen orthopedic doctors, chiropractors, acupuncturists, cryotherapy, everything, you named it, to the point where they wanted to have surgery on me. But not only that, I just left college just broken down, like emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I just didn't have any purpose. I was just like broken down. And it's not that wrestling led to that, but this is kind of part of the story about how I got to where I'm now.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just remember just in being this predicament of feeling lost in kind of like this space of limbo. I had this plan to go back to my hometown in central Illinois and be a high school teacher and coach the wrestling team, a dream that many successful high school athletes kind of share. But that wasn't my dream. We often live dreams of other people. So it's first getting clear on what my dream was. And I moved to Austin, Texas
Mhm.
for 2 months, actually. And like many people, if you talk to people in Austin, I ended up staying. I never left. Been here 3 years now. But there was a moment when I was walking around Lady Bird Lake and I was listening to a podcast. It was a Paul Chek podcast. And I would always, known of him. He was on many other podcasts. I've read his book twice, but I never thought to actually give it a go of actually living like a holistically oriented lifestyle. I was kind of more like let's see what biohacks I can afford as a college student and take all the supplements I can and let's keep working out as hard as I can because that's what worked out in the first place, but didn't really. So I remember listening to that podcast one time, walk around Lady Bird Lake here in Austin. And it just hit me. And I was like, what do I have to lose if I try this? What do I have to lose to actually just like get rid of the gadgets, the supplements, and just try to live a holistically lifestyle, a holistically minded lifestyle? And then ironically, immediately after that, on the same podcast, it was like 2 podcasts down, I saw the name Alex Rybczynski, Chek practitioner. And he's now a good friend of mine, mentor, who lives very close to me. And I listened to that. And then I reached out to him and I was like, hey, I kind of want to know about this like holistic Chek Institute stuff. And, I'm willing to work with you too, because I have no one else to turn to. I didn't want to have knee surgery because at that point I was like, I'll do whatever. I just want to grapple. I love doing Jiu-Jitsu. I'd done it like twice. And I was also self-conscious about wearing a knee sleeve just everywhere. And I just was limited in my ability to have fun. So at that point, I decided like, hey, I'm going to go meet this guy, work with him. And after experiencing some of that work, and he's a sneaky guy. He'll like, plant seeds in your head. So he worked in my body. He's also a neurosomatic therapist like me. He got me into that. But it was that point after experiencing that work that my knee got healthy. I got healthy. I felt the best I've ever felt in my life. In all those realms we talk about: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, intuitive. And I was like, this is what I want to do. Like I experienced it. I'm like the wounded healer. I want to come back and go through that hero's journey and go through this massive transformation and going through all these schools and these certifications to kind of come back with that sweet nectar to share with the world. So that was about 3 years ago, and it's been a hell of a ride. It's been really busy, lots of traveling, lots of education, lots of studying, but I'm at a point now where I'm just being and doing and helping clients. So that was kind of the story about what got me to where I am now.
Colin, how would you compare yourself leaving college broken to where you are now? Like what's been the big change? Like what shifted there? And how would you compare your sense of being now versus then?
I have a greater sense of my core values. I know what I die for. I know what I stand for. And I live by those things. Those are things that are dream affirmative for me and keep me on track. And part of that is being an adult and having responsibility and learning discernment, learning healthy discernment, right? Because not relying on other people's what they think's best for you. I mean, it's good to go out there experience. And that's part of it too. Is we're not here to theorize. Like intellectualism is a common cover up for fear of experiencing. So it's experiencing things, but learning that healthy discernment of like, this isn't that great for me, not like keep going with it because some Instagram fitness person said it was awesome, right? Or listening to all the doctors who are like, you need to immobilize your knee, or you need to take Tylenol, all these things that we know are just like terrible for your health, right? So it was experiencing and discernment. So I have a very healthy level of discernment now, as well as like an established list of core values that I live by and stand by.
Of those values, which ones come to mind as ones that have really helped you get from where you were at the end of college to where you are now? Like, are there one or two that you would just hang your hat on and say, like, this is this plus this equals Colin?
Man, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I've never thought about that. I might have to meditate on that later. I would say, so there's a couple of ways I look at values. One of them is just like the food I choose to put in my body. The sleep I choose, how I choose to move in, how I choose to work out, and how I choose to work in, how I choose to show up in relationships, and how I take care of myself. Just all those into that category, because it seems selfish, and I have to work with clients on this too, but having a value around understanding that it's I before we, before all, understanding that you come first, and it's a sacred selflessness that helps you show up for other people around you. That's a big value too, is, I got to do what's best for me to the degree that I don't hurt those around me. So, again, it's that discernment. It's checking in with my values constantly. It's knowing how to make effective choices around what it is I'm seeking in that moment. So, I would say discernment is a big one, honestly.
Discernment. Yeah, that's interesting, because I feel like when we're going to link to your Instagram bio in the show notes, and I feel like a lot of the content that you post, I can feel this connection between the mental, the physical, and the spiritual. And I think the three of us all have this shared perspective of being collegiate athletes and playing a sport at a high level, and identifying in this category of like fit but unhealthy, where like, yes, we're lifting, we're breaking our bodies down, we're probably not eating the best quality of foods. At least for me, like in Harrison, we're drinking alcohol in college, and we look, you quote unquote look aesthetic, but you're not actually healthy, and we weren't focusing on any of these other elements. Do you feel like you relate to that, and like how your approach has evolved over the years since you've been getting involved with Paul Chek?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I was probably 7 or 6% body fat leaving college, but I was also 160 pounds at 6'1", and my stature, I mean, you guys know me, like,
Yeah. Wow.
I was eating the best food too. Yeah. I was eating
What are you
organic
now?
food at that point.
You're 200 plus now?
I'm probably around 200. Yeah.
200.
Trying to lean out a little bit for April, maybe do some competitions, but I definitely say I identify with that kind of like that fit but unhealthy, right? Like being athletic is not synonymous with being healthy at all. And especially at that point, like I said, I was 160, I was ripped. But if you saw a picture of me, like I was bloated, and this comes in diet too, like eating tons of vegetables, raw vegetables, and that might work for some people, but I know we're big on this podcast about animal-based healing, right? So skinny, big bloated gut, injuries, not eating enough protein. So that was kind of that end years of college. But definitely identify that, yeah.
Yeah. And I know for you, you have really gotten heavily into the regenerative agriculture movement. And you mentioned consciously making the decision of where you choose to source your food and what you choose to put into your body. How did that journey of getting into regenerative agriculture look for you? And do you have like a typical day-to-day profile of eating that you like to follow?
Yeah, for sure. I'll share that. I got into it once I started learning. Well, for me, it was very much a spiritual connection with the animals that I was eating
Mm.
beyond the regenerative nutritional aspect. Because I mean, I think we've all read Sacred Cow, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's not that nutritionally different between a grass-fed cow or a pasture-raised cow, or even like, I mean, it's minute, right? But knowing what it does for the climate and how it, sequesters carbon, that was a big thing for me too, because we're on a planet where we're just killing the environment for our choices, and I think making the choice to switch to that is a very spiritually aligned choice, knowing that we're affecting the all through a choice that we make on the eye level. So that was a big part of it for me too, is knowing that I was, having a global impact on my decision. Um, and then part of that too was just getting to know where the meat came from, and being a part and giving thanks to that. I'm not very religious anymore, but I do pray for my meals every time, and I pray for the animal and the farmer and all sentient beings that kind of like went into this meal and kind of like brought this meal to life, and the life force energy that's in this meal. And every time I eat like a Force of Nature's like burger or like a White Oaks pasture burger, or through my running my deadlifts, like I just have so much like life force energy. And sorry, pause for a second. And um, feeling that connection when I went to the bison harvest at Rome Ranch, which I haven't done yet, but going there, taking part of that, putting my hand on the beating heart of a freshly harvested thanks to that animal, and then eating the raw heart and the raw liver, and just feeling how much energy was in it, was a very spiritual, emotional um, event for me. And to witness how the animals too um, gathered around it and gave thanks to that bison and said their goodbyes, I was very touched. So, how it affects the all, and spiritually aligned choice to get to know where my food came from and really eating the farmers. So that's kind of what really got me into that. And then obviously all the environmental stuff, how it sequesters 3 pounds of beef for every pound, and how it regenerates the soil, all that as well.
Colin, you cut up there a little bit, but I think the shared experience that I had at Rome Ranch, the same emotions you felt that day, I can really relate to. That the day out on that field was something I'll never forget. And you mentioned feeling the energy of the freshly killed animal, and that whole spiritual aspect of eating. We've totally lost that today. Do you think about that? Like when obviously it's important to you, but do you think about like how to share those values with other people? Because I think it's something that really does have some gravity to it. And if other people really started viewing their food that way, maybe they would really be more intentional to the same degree you are about, how they eat. So I'm, really just curious, like, have you shared that viewpoint and experience with other people? And has it, had that same impact that it had with you?
Yeah, it's a conversation that you have to have with clients, especially if they're more towards eating, more of a plant-based diet, which is fine. That works for your body. But if they're doing it more towards for environmental reasons or moralistic reasons, it's a conversation we have to have. And as a Chek practitioner, we use very in-depth health appraisal questionnaires that looked at someone's glandular system, their organ systems, and you can tell when someone's not eating enough protein or they're not eating animal products, because it's going to show up in their organ systems as dysfunctional. And you can just see it in their body too. You learn signs of, look at someone's skin, you look at their nails, so their eyes, their exercise recovery. So it's always a conversation that you have to keep in mind with clients, is like, A, are you averse to eating animal proteins? And B, and if it's because it's a moralistic reason, what if we try to get a local meat. We go to the farmer's market and you meet a farmer and they tell you the story about how their animals are raised. Or you start with like a forest of nature or a white oaks pasture and just try that. I mean, I have clients that like got into hunting because they became so passionate about this, and now they like hunt mule deer and like aoudad on their ranch all the time and just live off that. So it's really cool to see when someone like takes it to heart and actually starts living it and experiencing with it. And maybe it's not for them, but most of the time it is, and their body feels better because there's so much vital nutrients and especially regenerative farmed animal products.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I love what you said about when you actually eat a meal, you and your girlfriend sitting down and actually giving thanks for the food and the protein that's in front of you. And, you know, it's something where I feel like I personally am thankful for it, but I've never actually consciously thought to sit down and almost say a prayer. It literally gave me chills for some reason, because in some ways it is so easy now to take advantage of the food that you're eating, because all three of us have always just grown up with access to an overabundance of food. And it does seem like the people that are most connected to the life and death and are the most understanding of the environment or are ranchers and hunters, because they're connected to the kill, they're connected to the death, and they really understand the effort that it takes to be able to provide and put food on the table for someone. So it's just really powerful that you said that.
Yeah, and you know, I invite both of you and everyone just to kind of like, even if you want to say words or not, just sit at the meal and put your hands over it and just like feel for something subtly, right? Allow yourself to feel some kind of subtle. I'm a Chek practitioner, so I gotta get woo woo for a second, right? I gotta get a little woo woo.
Go for it.
So yeah, you'll feel some like subtle energy like come up in your hand and just, you know, just feel that. If it's a great animal and it's a great meal, it's made of love and it's a clean protein, like you'll probably feel something, and you'll probably feel something afterwards too. And so yeah, just giving thanks for food, I think, is really pivotal.
Colin, did you ever have any sort of diet experimentation? You mentioned like there's a lot of labels, right, for all the diets, but what has your experimentation been with diet to get you to where you are today?
Love this. Yeah. So done them all. Up until college, I was just eat whatever, right? Actually, funniest diet experimentation, which I've never talked about this, and it kind of counts, but when I was in 5th grade, I went on like an extreme weight loss diet and ate Cheerios for breakfast, lunch, and then like chicken breast for dinner.
Wow.
And yeah. And I went from a little obese kid to a skinny little kid, but who knows like what that did to me, right? But
yeah.
You might be able to patent that one. You might be one of the only people who've done the Cheerio and chicken diet.
Cheerio, CCs, yeah, and that's my initials too, CC.
Yeah.
Man, that's crazy. But when I got to college, my first year was still just eat whatever, right? We would go wrestle and go back to Perkins and like Denny's after wrestling tournaments. My sophomore year was the first experimentation. I started to experiment with the paleo diet, and I got real lean and I felt great. Like protein, healthy fats. I went gluten-free at that time, which made a giant difference. So that was the first one. And and then that was the first one. So experimented with that. After that, I started to, you know, follow certain people that would be unnamed, where they were talking about like protein and like how you need the minimum amount for like the RDA, like 0.6 or something like that, or 0.68 grams or something. So towards my last years of college, I started playing around fasting and keto and even more like plant-based, like lunch and like smoothie-based breakfasts. So I started playing with that. I still felt pretty good at that point, though. Like I was starting to notice like some like adrenal fatigue, because that was not conducive to the high energy output.
Right.
It could probably be done, but like at that point, it wasn't for me. So I was eating very low protein. I was fasting too. I started fasting, so I would do a 24-hour fast on the weekends, which I think is a phenomenal practice for anybody to get into that for multiple reasons: gut healing, spiritual aspect, all that kind of autophagy. But as a hard-charging dumb kid on those 24-hour fasts, I would still work out super hard. I would go for like, that was the day I went for like super long bike rides. So I started experimenting with fasting. And then my last year at college, I would say I was more plant-based. Like smoothie for breakfast, can of sardines on a salad for lunch, and then some kind of protein. I was probably hitting like 115, 120 grams of protein a day. And that's kind of like when I told you guys I left, like I was just bloated, no energy. My testosterone was like tanked, right? So I've experimented with those.
That's pretty low protein intake for a guy who's one, extremely active wrestling collegiately at the Division I level, and then also just based on your weight as well. That's not nearly enough protein just on the surface, right?
No, not at all. I mean, probably should gain like 1 to 1.2 grams
Right.
per pound of body weight, especially like the amount of output I was doing.
Right.
On top of like, that sport needs carbs. Like you got to have carbs for that sport. It's a very
Totally.
sport. So being way too keto that year too was not good for my hormones at all, which it's a great diet, but for me in that situation, not good.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, when I started getting to the Chek stuff, Paul goes by metabolic typing. We call it primal pattern dieting. So you fill out a questionnaire, it kind of like, for like what makes you feel best. And there's like way like longer ones on the metabolic typing like the website. But the one we use for clients is pretty basic. You kind of get like a baseline, like what's your genetics? Like, are you someone who has more genetics from like the equator? Or are you someone who has like European genetics who probably could live off meat and potatoes or just like a bunch of meat, right? So it's kind of subjective, but like when you look at it, it was like Paul started talking about eating like saturated fat and full fat butters and eating organ meats and all these things. So I started experimenting that. And that's when I felt the best. And I started putting back on some muscle, got back up to like 170, 180. And up until like this year.
Oh, we lost you there for a sec, Colin.
Yeah, okay, I was just saying.
You said up until this year.
Yep, I saw.
Oh.
We're good. I'm very animal based. Never been full carnivore. Never done that, but I'm at a nice medium right now, and I feel great. Of meat, organs, fruit, honey. With the side of meat. It's just experimentation, but I've been feeling great. Been feeling good energy. Meat style diet. I think it's going to be a couple months from now, but I'm not enough to eat what I want. And like ham sandwiches, but enough state of body or their body that they can handle vegetables if they wanted, or they can handle some and they can handle a meal or two once a month that might have an inch or two of seed oil in it. So I think the goal is to have a healthy enough body to tolerate these things, but it's not like I approve them and suggest them. But right now I'm animal based, I would say.
Colin, are there any fruits and vegetables that your stomach tolerates well that you will incorporate into your daily routine?
Yeah, I said onions. Onions are great. Honestly, whenever I can get to the farmer's market too, like I would say I'm probably 95% animal based. Like if I can get it at the farmer's market and it's organic, like I might do some arugula. I love onions. I love ferments. I love fermented vegetables.
Yeah.
Sauerkraut. Pickles. Pickles are great. So, whatever I can get there. I still try to avoid the cruciferous vegetables.
Right.
I'm sure I do fine on them, but like I'm kind of just giving this a try and I'm really liking it and I've noticed some improvement. So, yeah, those are some things that I do include.
Mm-hmm.
The fermented veggies are awesome. I think that's kind of something that gets glossed over a little bit. Like I usually don't have too much issues with them, and they help make some of my more predominantly meat-based meals like a little bit more flavorful. Like I'll do some fermented or pickled onions or jalapenos. And I find that it's just a nice little accent to what is otherwise basically an entirely animal-based diet. So I think throwing some of that stuff in there is okay for sure.
Yeah. And with those, I got to really moderate myself and check in with my digestion, because more ferments are not always better, right? I mean, this is one thing that I really learned in my integrative health practicing education is, everyone's so quick to hop on kombucha and ferments and sauerkrauts and all these things. But even if it's a good bacteria, too much of a good thing is still a bad thing, right? Too much good bacteria can still lead to SIBO. Too much bad bacteria can lead to SIBO and all those effects, right? So it's really making sure, like, again, come back to the discernment, like, do you feel good 2 to 3 days after eating that? And understanding that ferment might not be good for you based on your symptoms, right? So I'm cautious with those, but so far the ones I've been getting are pretty good.
So it sounds like you're really structuring a lot of your meals around very clean, intentionally sourced animal protein. And then depending on what you get from the farmer's market, you could work that in, every few days, whether it's like sauerkraut or some fresh berries or something that you're picking up from the farm.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard to get fruit right now. So the fruit usually is just some like sprouts. But I try to like eat like what's in season, even if it's not like grown in Texas, but right now it's grapefruit season, it's orange season. So I love the idea of like eating seasonality. So I try to maintain that.
I think it's huge. Is there anything that you do in terms of practices that kind of tie back to your nutrition or just underlying health? Like one of the things you mentioned earlier was meditation. Do you kind of meditate, journal? Are there any other things that you would recommend to your clients as kind of basic daily things to incorporate?
Yeah, for sure. The praying over the food is a big one, I would say, because it really brings a sense of ease to you. Couple big breaths, like a nice 4, 7, 8 breathing before a meal, especially if you're such a stressed out state and all that blood is like shuttled to your extremities and you're eating in a stressful state. So I would say that's a big one. Just like take some deep breaths, center yourself. I never want to have a meal after an argument or a meal right after a practice, just because I need to calm my central nervous system and kind of get back in that parasympathetic state. After meals, of course, I love like Mark Bell's 10-minute walks, all those things. All those things that can help with postprandial blood sugar. So I love to tell people to do that. For me, that's like 3 15-minute walks. That's also going to help with your biological oscillators in your body. Kind of help pump some blood to that stomach and kind of harmonize your stomach and your heart and your brain. All these things that kind of run on a loop, right? So those are some big things I would say. If you suspect an HCl, like an acid deficiency, one thing might help is to drink some lemon juice, like a third of a cup of lemon juice before, during, and after. But those are a few things. So those are a few free things, right? I'm not saying go buy digestive enzymes, but lemons are pretty cheap. Anybody can do breath work. Anybody can go for walks.
Right.
So we'll keep it to those freebies.
I like it.
Colin, wasn't there, I think we were going back and forth on Instagram. I think you had posted a video or an instructional on it. I think you either called it like organ or like gut massaging or something that you do with your patients. Can you touch on that a little bit? Because I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I just did that with a client who just left here recently. But visceral massage is very powerful. It's as a neurosomatic therapist, the type of manual therapy I practice, we're trained in a lot of things, including cranial work and upper cervical work. I mentioned that because of the connection of the vagus nerve and how that can be affected by a subluxation of the atlas, which is your top cervical vertebra, if you guys know your anatomy. That's an assumption there. But that runs down to your stomach, right? Everyone knows about the vagus nerve. But the organ massage themselves, someone who has IBS or acid reflux or diarrhea or constipation, they would benefit really a lot from, well, first I'd look at the stomach. I would massage the stomach. There's it's kind of hard for me to explain how I do it, but when you do organ massage, you want to flush the organ in the way that the portals and the valves go. So that kind of looks like me getting under the rib cage and kind of flushing it, working with the breath. Large intestine massage is phenomenal for constipation or diarrhea. Ileocecal valve massage is really great because that's where the small intestine meets the large intestine. And people who have SIBO and that stays open, the feces are going to flow back into the small intestines, and that might cause SIBO itself because of that backwash of the bad bacteria. Small intestine massage is fantastic too. Just kind of detonifying them too, because the organs are all muscles, right? They can be massaged as well. I would say the other one is, I mean, honestly, all of them are great. All of them are super relative. Like the liver is going to help with your liver detoxification. Pancreas is going to help normalize blood sugar. Kidneys, if you're super stressed out, massaging your kidneys is going to help lower that cortisol, which is probably going to help your digestion in turn too. Pancreas too, the pancreatic enzymes. So especially us, we're eating animals-based diet. Gallbladder massage, people who don't have sufficient bile, visceral massage of the gallbladder would probably be very beneficial for those people.
That's something that definitely resonates with me, just having ulcerative colitis, where I feel like obviously I have gone down the rabbit hole with the diet, but that would be something that I definitely would love to work with you on to start to incorporate if I can just continue to improve my gut health even more. And I think the interesting thing about modern society, right, is I feel like we all see this with a lot of our friends that I think either have IBS or like undiagnosed stomach issues because we're so chronically stressed out all the time. We're staring at these screens, blasting our faces with blue light. A lot of us are working jobs where you're in a cubicle and you're dealing with the stress of that. Just being able to have these exercises to help you get back to your baseline are so important, and they're so functional to what you do.
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned being chronically stressed. That is the root cause of everything most of the time, right? I was just reading a research paper on this concept called, and I like to talk about this. I've talked about this on another podcast or two, but this concept of a central sensitization, and how our nervous system can become so sensitized because of all these driving signals to the spinal cord, including poor nutrition, chemical imbalances, or like being exposed to chemical toxicities or EMF. And then from a descending pattern, we have our emotions, right? We might be anxious, you might be depressed, we might be lonely, and then injuries too. So all these things are driving this like sensitization to the spinal cord, which keeps us in a chronic flight or flight state. And then our digestion is just terrible because we have all these different signals coming from all around us, like a barrage, and we just kind of break down. So it's understanding that like digestion is more than just eating good food, but that's the best place to start. That's the best thing and easiest thing you can do for a client is to start to get into eat good food, because that often helps a lot of those other things.
Do you find that to be the most common, like, initial thing that you're going to start tweaking with your clients? Is, they show up with a handful of different things, and is diet usually like your go-to, hey, let's improve this first before we get to, physical activity and other things?
Both but yes. So if they're a client that's coming for everything, like neurosomatic, corrective exercise, and the big thing is the lifestyle coaching, nutrition coaching. Nutrition is always the first one we start with because it can affect your limbic system. It can affect your emotional system. It's going to affect your stress. And getting someone to eat good organic food, it sounds funny, just drinking water, half your body in water. Like, it's crazy. Like, people pay me to tell them to drink water, like half their body in water, and put some sea salt in there. Like, that's all going to help your GI system. Just taking out the processed crap, and what's that going to do for your body? It's going to help your digestion. That's going to calm your stress. You're going to sleep better. And these are all like individual categories, but the first one, if we look like on my paperwork, it's, you are what you eat. And that's a big one we start with because of the biochemistry and how it can affect your body on a cellular level and how it's going to affect everything else, hopefully. So yeah, we always start with food. And it's little things too, like it's rainbow bridges. right? It's 80-20 rule initially. Get gluten-free bread instead of gluten. Get a healthy ice cream, but eventually the goal is organic, regenerative farm, the best quality.
I like how pragmatic that approach and way of thinking is. Like Brett and I talk about this all the time. When you yourself have gotten to a certain point of fitness and like thinking about your own health in a very intentional way, like yourself, it's really easy to try to impress your own views upon others in this idealistic way, where it's like, you need to eat like I eat. And then you kind of forget the journey that you yourself have been on, which is so much harder than what everyone who's already healthy and feeling great about certain things. It's a much more challenging task than they remember, I think, for a lot of the time. So it's really relatable and cool to hear you kind of talk about your coaching practice and philosophies as something that's a lot more pragmatic than just like, hey, you need to eat and drop everything that you're doing right now and eat this certain way.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta meet them where we're at. Like that's the big thing is we don't coach the symptoms, we coach the person. Someone comes to see me for back pain, I don't treat the back pain. I treat Sally, who's on the table and has a story in front of me. And to tell somebody to like drop everything and start eating organic food immediately, and to like give up their vices, their little devils that keep them sane, and like give them something to work on. Paul Chek one time told me at one of my courses, he said, be careful not to lose your devils in the process of healing, because those devils are kind of like what gives you something to work for. And if you had no shadow and you had no devils, then you would just be perfect. And if you're perfect, you knew everything, you wouldn't have anything to live for. So that being said, it's like, you got to ease them in. You got to let them keep some of their stuff. You got a Rainbow Bridge. Let's get a healthy ice cream. Let's get a Zevia instead of a soda. Let's get them off the processed crap, I said. And if they're not nutritionally sound, if they're not physiologically sound, they're definitely not going to be sound enough to start looking at their relationship with their mother or their father, or what their relationship to quote unquote their God means to them. Right. So if someone's not healthy biochemically with good food and biomechanically, they're not going to be able to do the deeper work that someone gets to down the road. Right. So we always start with the basics and we get them to a point where they can start handling the heavier stuff.
Yeah, you're speaking our language. This is what we try to harp on all the time. It's like just the basics are something that you can always go back to and improve on. So love to hear that. Brett, did you have something you want to say there?
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment. I think we're always, we talk about this all the time, but I think we continually get blown away when you actually think about the impact that controlling your dietary inputs actually has in taking autonomy over the food you're putting into your system. We were just talking about that this morning with Dr. Philobadia, who's a heart surgeon that we had on. And we were talking about the fact that people have a tendency to, we have this short-term style of thinking where we'll think about just the upfront cost of a ribeye, but we don't think about, what's the cost of investment to have more energy, to be able to be in a more positive mood for your spouse or your siblings, or to have more energy at your job. Like we're saying, how those are really priceless investments if you could try and put a price on it. Yet as a society, we hyper focus on the price of food as opposed to focusing on the compounding effect that you get from nourishing yourself with the right foods and doing the right exercises, which I think is a lot of what you've been speaking to us about.
I 100% agree. Yeah. Cause I mean, food is more than like monetary value. Food is more than fuel. Like food is information. Like it's informing your body and how to operate, on how to metabolize and how to be, right? So it's literally informing our body on a cellular level. So yeah, and it's also, one thing I talk about too is like there is a shadow aspect of food as well, and how sometimes we can look at food as like a control mechanism, right? We choose to eat only good foods because we lack control in our life, and that's a lot of time maybe people who are overweight or people who are underweight is we choose to eat something or choose not to eat something because we lack control in our life. So it's being cautious. I paused. I stopped my thought.
Perfect.
Wi-Fi issue. Yeah. But it's, again, it's learning that discernment. Am I eating too much because, I feel safe when I eat this, or if I put on extra body weight, I have a layer of safety around me? Or is it like maybe my example in college where I weigh underweight because for me, that was a sense of control, and I could control how much I exercise, and I can control, therefore, how much I lack to put in my body, or maybe I feel like I didn't deserve to put in my body as well. So that's where kind of like coming back to core values and having a dream around food is very powerful. It's not enough to just say like, hey, let's try this diet, but like, what's your why behind?
The control aspect of that on one side is something that I think about a lot. And I think you just sparked something for me that I need to actually reflect on a bit more, which is like that under eating side where it's Colin in college or high school, whenever it was, where you were like trying to lose weight, and it was like almost the other end of control where you're like so hyper focused and in control that it's like causing all these negative externalities. And then, yeah, I think there's a broad spectrum there where there is this balance where you need to find that, your food is much more than just, something that it, shows up on your plate. It's fueling you in every single aspect, and in every single cell in your body is taking it up and using it. So I think that is such a profound way of thinking, and an awesome way for people who are listening to try to like start understanding their relationship with food and how they can get deeper down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, I just invite everyone to consider like, why do you eat the food you eat? What part of you benefits from eating the food you eat? And what part of you, paradoxically doesn't benefit from eating the food you eat, right? And just think on that, right? What part of you benefits? Yeah. What part of you doesn't? What part of you suffers or like is harmed by the food you put in your mouth? Whether it is a good food, whether it's a good food, whether it's a bad food, quote unquote, whatever that means to you. But yeah, there's more to food than just it being fuel for our bodies.
Definitely.
Clemens, I feel like that's an amazing ending point, honestly, just to cap off a phenomenal conversation. I feel like any longer would be forcing it. And we could probably talk to Colin for 3 hours, but yeah, I personally learned a ton. And I feel like I have like 4 or 5 immediate takeaways that I want to start to think about more and incorporate into my daily life. And I'm also going to be in Austin in 2 weeks, Colin. So I will guaranteed hit you up so you can teach me some stuff about the organ massaging and just get base to another level.
Well, let's just do a few jiu-jitsu rolls. Well, I think Colin can do some organ massages and jiu-jitsu at the same time.
What, bursting my sling?
That's how I get my clients. I heard them and they come see me. So.
Exactly.
Awesome.
But seriously, Colin, thank you so much for coming on, man. I think I can speak for Clemens and I. We both personally always learn a ton in our conversations, and would be honored to have you back on any other time you want to come back on and continue the conversation. But thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you guys. It was wonderful.